My name is Emily, and if you had met me a few years ago, you would have thought I had the perfect life. People in my neighborhood used to say I was lucky. Lucky to have a handsome husband, two beautiful kids, and a home that looked like it came straight out of a family magazine. But I've learned that what looks perfect on the outside can be the biggest lie you'll ever live. Mark and I had been married for 15 years. We met in college. He was the charming, ambitious business major, and I was the quiet, book-loving girl who worked part-time in the library. Somehow, he noticed me. He made me feel like I was the center of his world. And for years, I believed I was. We bought our house in a quiet suburb when our daughter, Sophie, was born. She's 12 now, smart, thoughtful, and sometimes a little too observant for her own good. Then came Ethan, our 9-year-old. He's sweet, full of energy, and he still thinks his dad hung the moon. To him, Mark is a hero. And maybe that's why I ignored the small things for so long, because Mark looked like the perfect dad to everyone. He coached Ethan's baseball games, he attended Sophie's school concerts, and he loved to play the part of family man at neighborhood barbecues. And I supported him. I managed the house, worked part-time at the library, packed the kids' lunches, and made sure everything ran smoothly. I thought we were a team. But if I'm being honest with myself, there were moments, tiny cracks in the picture, that I chose not to look at too closely. His phone that never left his pocket, the late nights he said were business meetings, the way he sometimes looked at me like I was just another piece of furniture in the house. I brushed it all off. Because when you've built your entire life around someone, you don't want to believe they could be hiding something from you. I still remember one evening in particular. It was Sophie's 12th birthday. We had a small party at the house, balloons everywhere, pizza boxes stacked on the counter, and kids running around. Everyone was laughing, singing, celebrating. But Mark, he kept stepping away. His phone lit up over and over again, and his face changed each time he looked at it. His smile disappeared, replaced by a tight, almost nervous expression. When I asked him if everything was okay, he just kissed my cheek quickly and said, "Just work, Em, don't worry." And I didn't press him. I told myself not to ruin Sophie's special day, but something deep inside me stirred that night. A little whisper I didn't want to hear. A whisper that said, "Emily, something's not right." And as much as I tried to bury it, that whisper would only grow louder. Because the truth was, my perfect marriage was already rotting from the inside. But I didn't realize that was just the beginning of the nightmare. After Sophie's birthday, I started noticing little things I couldn't ignore anymore. Mark's late nights became more frequent. He used to call me if he was running late, but now he'd just show up hours after dinner, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. At first, I told myself it was stress. He worked in finance, and I knew deadlines could be brutal. But then there were the phone calls. He'd step outside, whispering with his back to me, his hand cupped around the phone like he didn't want me to hear me. When I asked, he'd laugh it off. "Emily, you're overthinking everything. It's just work politics. You wouldn't be interested." But the problem was, I was interested. I was his wife. Why wouldn't I be? One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and realized the bed beside me was empty. I padded downstairs quietly, expecting to see Mark working on his laptop like he sometimes did. But instead, I found him sitting in the dark living room, phone pressed to his ear, whispering. He didn't notice me standing there in the hallway. His voice was soft but urgent, almost tender. I caught a few words. Miss you, can't wait. She suspects nothing. My stomach twisted. I wanted to walk in and confront him right then, but my legs felt glued to the floor. My heart hammered so loudly, I was afraid he might hear it. When he finally hung up, I darted upstairs before he saw me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood. Maybe it was work. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe, maybe, maybe. But the whisper in my gut was turning into a scream. The next morning, Mark was his usual self, smiling, making pancakes for the kids, and kissing the top of my head like nothing had happened. He looked so normal, so loving, that I almost believed I had dreamed the whole thing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I started paying closer attention. I noticed how he suddenly cared more about his appearance. He bought new suits, started going to the gym more often, and even wore cologne to business dinners. When I teased him about dressing up for the office, he just winked and said, "A man has to look good if he wants to stay on top." But I couldn't laugh with him, because deep down, I started feeling like I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me anymore. And yet, as much as it hurt, I still clung to hope. I thought, maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe if I just support him more, things will go back to normal. But things didn't go back to normal. In fact, they only got worse, because the first cracks had already started to spread, and soon they would shatter everything. Once you start looking for signs, you can't unsee them. That was the problem. Every little detail screamed at me, and no matter how much I tried to silence it, the truth kept seeping through. Mark became distant. He'd still smile and joke with the kids, but with me, it was different. His eyes didn't linger on me anymore. His hugs were shorter, his kisses quick, like a man checking off a chore. When I tried to talk to him about us, he brushed it away. "Emily, stop analyzing everything. I'm just tired. Work is crazy right now." But I wasn't imagining the lies. One night, he said he was working late at the office. But when Sophie couldn't sleep, she asked if Daddy would read her a story. So I called his office line, just to check when he'd be home. The receptionist answered and casually mentioned he had left hours ago. My hand shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. When Mark came home that night, smelling of wine and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I asked him about it. He didn't flinch. "Oh, yeah, I left the office. A couple of us went for drinks. I didn't want to bother you that late." His tone was so casual, so dismissive, that for a split second, I doubted myself. But then I noticed his shirt collar. Lipstick. A faint smudge of pink, right on the edge. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought he might hear it. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I smiled weakly and said, "Oh, okay." I stared at the numbers, my stomach turning cold. Vacations, dinners, jewelry, none of it had been for me or for the kids. So who was it for? When I confronted Mark, he laughed. Actually laughed. "Emily, you're getting paranoid. I've been moving money around for investments. You know I handle our finances. Trust me. But trust was exactly what I didn't have anymore. I started keeping a notebook. Every time money disappeared, every time he lied about where he was, every time he looked at me like I was invisible, I wrote it all down. Because some part of me knew this wasn't going to end with simple excuses. And I was right. Because soon, I would discover the one piece of evidence that shattered all my denial. And after that, nothing would ever be the same. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where everything felt routine. The kids were at school, I had just finished shelving books at the library, and I came home early to fold laundry before starting dinner. Mark's phone was on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications. He never left it unattended. My heart skipped. I stood there staring at it, my hands trembling. For 15 years, I had respected his privacy, never once crossing that line. But now, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The screen lit up. Can't wait to see you tonight. Heart. Vanessa. I froze. The name stabbed me like a knife. Vanessa. My stomach churned. My fingers moved before I could stop them. I picked up the phone, opened the thread, and read. The messages scrolled endlessly, a digital diary of betrayal. Last night was amazing. I love the way you make me feel. She has no idea. There it was, in black and white. My husband wasn't just lying to me, he was mocking me behind my back. And then the photos. Pictures of them at dinners, hotel rooms, vacations. Jewelry I had never seen before. Smiles I hadn't seen on his face in years. He looked like the man I used to know, but not with me, with her. My hands shook so violently, I dropped the phone. It clattered against the counter, the sound echoing through the silent house. I wanted to scream, cry, throw something. But instead, I just stood there frozen in shock. When the kids came home, I plastered on a smile and pretended everything was fine. I helped with homework, cooked dinner, laughed at Ethan's silly jokes. But inside, I felt hollow, like someone had carved me out and left nothing behind. That night, when Mark came home late again, I watched him carefully. He kissed my cheek, told me he was exhausted, and went upstairs to shower. I stared at his back as he walked away, my heart heavy with the truth I could no longer ignore. I knew. And once you know, you can't unknow. Still, I said nothing, because deep down, I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to understand just how deep this betrayal went. And when I finally dug deeper, what I uncovered wasn't just about love. It was about money. And that was when the real nightmare began. The affair was one thing, a knife straight through my heart. But the money, that was the twist of the blade. I couldn't sleep after finding those messages. Night after night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me. How could he sleep so peacefully while my world was falling apart? So I started investigating. At first, I combed through our bank statements. I thought I'd find the usual, restaurants, maybe a hotel or two. But what I found made my blood run cold. Thousands of dollars gone. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. Luxury hotel stays, expensive jewelry stores, transfers I couldn't trace, vacations charged to our account that I had never been on. I pulled out my notebook and started writing it all down. Every withdrawal, every purchase,
The numbers didn't lie. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was draining us. One afternoon, I drove to the bank myself. I asked to see a breakdown of our savings account. The banker gave me a sympathetic look as she explained that the account was almost empty. 15 years of hard-earned savings gone. I remember clutching the edge of her desk, my knees weak. Are you sure? There has to be a mistake. But there was no mistake. Mark had been quietly bleeding us dry. I left the bank with my chest tight, tears stinging my eyes. I sat in the car for an hour, gripping the steering wheel, feeling like the walls of my life were collapsing around me. That night, I confronted him gently, carefully. Mark, I was looking at our savings today. I don't understand. Where did all the money go? He didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his chair, sipping a glass of whiskey, and smirked. Emily, you worry too much. I moved some things around. Investments. You wouldn't understand. Investments. That was his answer. But when I pressed him, his tone shifted. He slammed the glass down on the table so hard, the liquid splashed over the edge. Drop it, Emily. I said I'll handle it. For a moment, I was too stunned to reply. He had never spoken to me like that before. And then I realized this wasn't just about lies or money. It was about control. He thought I was too weak, too naive to see what he was doing. But he was wrong. Because if he wanted a game, I was going to learn how to play it. And soon, I'd uncover something even worse. Something that proved he wasn't just planning on draining our money. He was planning to throw me away completely. After that night, something inside me shifted. I no longer looked at Mark the same way. Every smile he gave me felt fake, every kiss a performance. I knew he was lying, but he was so good at making me doubt myself.
Mark, I just feel like you're hiding things from me. You come home late, the money is disappearing, and I don't feel like I know you anymore. He leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. Then he laughed, actually laughed, like I was a child who had said something ridiculous. Emily, you've been watching too many crime shows. You think I'm running around with secret women and draining our accounts? Come on, I'm working. I'm investing. For you, for the kids. His words were sharp, but his tone carried that condescending sweetness that made me question my own reality. Gaslighting. That's what it was. I see it clearly now. But in that moment, I wanted to believe him. Still, my instincts screamed otherwise. The lies grew bolder. One night, he claimed he was stuck at a business dinner, but Sophie had a school project and she wanted her dad's help. So I called him, just to ask when he'd be home. The line rang once, then went to voicemail. Minutes later, a text appeared. Busy. Don't wait up. But then Sophie glanced over my shoulder and frowned. Mom, why does Dad's text have a heart at the end? He never does that with us. I looked down. She was right. A small red heart sat at the end of his message. My stomach dropped. I forced a smile for her sake. Oh, sweetie, it must have been a mistake. But inside, I was shaking. That night, when Mark finally walked in, smelling of expensive cologne and wearing that smug smile, I said nothing. I kissed him on the cheek, pretended I believed his story, and went to bed. Because I realized something. Confronting him wasn't working. He'd just twist my words, make me feel insane, and keep going behind my back. So, I stopped pushing. I stopped questioning. Instead, I started watching, quietly, patiently, pretending to be the oblivious, naive wife he thought I was. Because the more I stayed quiet, the more reckless he became. And soon, that recklessness would hand me the proof I needed. The proof of not just an affair, not just stolen money, but his plan to destroy me completely. Pretending not to know was harder than I thought. Every time Mark walked through the door with that fake smile, every time he texted under the table, every time he whispered into the phone late at night, I wanted to scream. But instead, I smiled. I cooked dinner. I folded laundry. I tucked the kids in. Because behind the mask, I was planning. I bought a small notebook that I hid inside a cookbook no one ever touched. I wrote down every lie, every late-night phone call, every suspicious charge. I even started taking photos of receipts I found in his pockets, fancy restaurants, jewelry stores, hotel rooms. And then I did something that terrified me. I contacted a lawyer. Not a flashy one, just a quiet, discreet woman recommended by a friend at the library. I met her in secret, telling Mark I was volunteering at a school event. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Emily, if what you're telling me is true, you need to protect yourself and your children. Start gathering evidence. Don't confront him yet. Let him dig his own grave." So, that's what I did. Days turned into weeks, and Mark grew bolder. He was home less and less, the bank account thinner every day. And then one night, the truth hit me harder than anything before. Mark thought I was asleep, but I heard his voice downstairs, low and excited. I crept to the staircase and froze when I heard her name. Vanessa. He was on the phone with her, pacing the living room. "She has no idea, babe. None. By the time I'm done, everything will be in our name. The house, the money, everything. She won't see it coming." My breath caught. He chuckled. "Divorce? Please. She's too soft, too stupid to fight me. I'll make her look crazy if she tries. The kids? Oh, I'll take them on weekends, just so I don't look bad. Then you and I can finally live the life we deserve." I pressed my hand against my mouth to stop the sob from escaping. There it was, his plan. He wasn't just cheating. He wasn't just stealing. He was plotting to erase me completely. That night, I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, my heart burning with a new kind of fire. Fear, yes, but also anger. Because he thought I was weak. He thought I was stupid. And he had no idea that I was already 3 steps ahead. This wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. This wasn't about forgiveness or hope. This was about survival. And if Mark wanted a war, I was ready to give him one. What he didn't know was that I already had the weapons, the receipts, the bank statements, the text messages, enough to burn his perfect little world to the ground. I just needed the right moment to strike. And soon, that moment came. I remember the exact moment I stopped being the woman who waited for answers and became the woman who made things happen. It was late, too late to be awake, really, but the house was quiet and the air felt electric, like everything was about to change. I sat at the kitchen table with my little hidden notebook, the receipts, the printouts of bank statements, screenshots of messages. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. For the first time in months, I felt a small, hard thing settle inside my chest. It felt like a seed of courage. I called Rachel quietly from my phone in the car so the kids wouldn't hear. Rachel was the lawyer I'd met a few weeks earlier, the one who told me to let him dig his own grave. File paperwork today, she said without hesitation. Emergency motion to freeze joint assets, temporary custody language in case he tries anything, and a forensic accountant. If he's been moving funds, we need a paper trail. Hearing her say those words made the whole thing feel official, dangerous but real. That night, while Mark was out meeting a client, I did things I'd never imagined I would do. I copied files from his laptop, email confirmations, hotel bookings, payment receipts, everything that tied him to Vanessa and to the accounts being drained. I set up a hidden folder in my cloud with a password only I knew. I photographed bank statements at odd hours. I made sure there were backups in 3 places: my email, a thumb drive I hid in a library book, and a safe deposit box I'd rented under my maiden name. I changed passwords. I logged into our joint accounts from a different IP and requested alerts to go to my phone only. I called the bank, calm, steady, pretending to be checking on automatic transfers. They gave me an account history. It was worse than I thought. Transfers into accounts with names I didn't recognize, wire transfers labeled consulting fees that didn't add up. Every line made my jaw clench. Rachel moved faster than I could have hoped. She filed the emergency motion that very week. The judge signed a temporary restraining order, placing a hold on all large withdrawals and transfers while the court reviewed evidence. My stomach fluttered when Rachel told me. It felt illegal and righteous at the same time. I had crossed the line, but the line had already been crossed for me. We brought in Omar, a forensic accountant with a kind voice and very sharp eyes. He sat at my kitchen table with his laptop and a stack of invoices and said he made mistakes if he thought everything was hidden. He traced transactions that looped through shell accounts through a small company registered in a neighboring state. He found a credit card in Vanessa's name with our billing address as the mailing address for several months. It was all there, the pattern, the audacity, the arrogance. While they did the legal work, I did what I had to at home. I moved the kids' passports and the deed to the house to a safe place. I printed copies of everything and tucked them into a folder labeled "For Sophie if anything happens." It felt weird to write that, but I also felt oddly empowered. I was protecting my children in the only way I knew how. I pretended to go on with life. I made Sophie's lunches. I cheered a little too loudly at Ethan's baseball game. I smiled when Mark walked in and told me about his big client dinner. He still had that confident, slack-jawed swagger, like the world belonged to him. He had no idea how close he was to losing it. The day the court order came through, Mark was out. Rachel called me from her car and whispered, "The temporary freeze is in place. Don't react. Let him find out in front of other people." I could hear the smile in her voice and the wariness, too. She added, "We'll file the petition for divorce on Monday, and we'll include the custody motion. Keep the kids out of it until we're ready." I did what she told me. I kept my face bland, my responses short. At breakfast, Mark laughed about a golf trip with buddies. I poured his coffee and asked about the kids' soccer cleats. He kissed the top of my head like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. That night, I set the table for a family dinner. It was deliberate. I cooked Mark's favorite lasagna. The kids helped make garlic knots and made big, ridiculous paper hats. I wanted normal to look normal. I wanted him to walk in and feel safe. Because people reveal themselves when they're comfortable. As we ate, Mark kept checking his phone. It buzzed once, then twice. He frowned and said nothing. After dessert, the doorbell rang.
It was a delivery driver with a small envelope. A notice from the bank, addressed to both of us. Mark opened it, skimmed, and his face went slack. He tried to read it, and I watched a short internal panic flicker. Then he masked it with annoyance. "Probably just some paperwork," he said loudly so the kids wouldn't hear. His voice wavered. Ethan asked if everything was okay. Mark forced a smile. He walked into the study with the envelope and closed the door. I sat at the table with my fork halfway to my mouth, listening to him shuffle papers. My heart hammered, but my voice was steady when I smiled and asked Sophie about her drawing. I saw him through the slightly ajar door, his back to the room, shoulders tense. He was counting. I could tell by the rapid movement of his hands. When he slammed the door and came back to the table, the man who sat down was different. He was a man who'd been disarmed in private and now had to perform in public. He laughed too loudly at a joke about the neighbors, touched mine and the kids' heads with a clumsy affection, and excused himself to work just for a minute. That minute stretched. He didn't come back until after the kids were in bed. When he finally walked in, his eyes were rimmed red. He stopped at the kitchen counter and said, "We need to talk." There was no tenderness in his voice, just the sharp, brittle edge of a man realizing a plan had failed. I pushed my chair back slowly, folded my hands, and met him without flinching. I said, "Okay." He stared for a long second, maybe hoping I'd crumble, maybe hoping for a different reaction. He got neither. "Do you know about Vanessa?" he asked, as if that would hurt less than the truth. I nodded once. "Yes." He laughed, a sound like a broken hinge. "How long?" he asked. I said, "Long enough." The look he gave me, equal parts anger and something like fear, was the first honest thing he'd shown me in months. He thought he'd already won. He hadn't counted on me being able to fight back. He hadn't counted on the law, on Omar's spreadsheets, on Rachel's fierce calm, or my stubbornness. He didn't yet know the full extent of what I had. He didn't know that his cards were blocked, that several transfers had been reversed, that there were subpoenas on their way to his email address. He didn't know that the trap had been set, not for him alone, but for the life he planned to steal from us. I watched him take a breath and begin to speak, but before he could, I said, "Save it. Say what you want to say in front of a judge. For now, sleep. Tomorrow, you'll get the rest." He looked at me like I'd taken something sacred and thrown it away. He didn't yet realize how complete his undoing would be. I had my evidence. I had my order. I had my lawyer. I had my kids. And for the first time in a long while, I no longer felt like a victim.
But I also knew that pulling the thread on his life would unravel a lot more than just his comfort. It would expose secrets, embarrass him, and maybe hurt the kids in ways I couldn't fully foresee. I chose action anyway, because some things, like dignity and safety, are worth the wreckage they leave behind. That night, as I went to bed, I turned the lock on my side of the door and lay awake listening to the house breathe. I had lit the match. The rest, I hoped, would burn away what needed burning. And yet, I was terrified of what the flames would reveal. Because revenge is a dangerous thing. It asks for a price. I was ready to pay it. But I didn't know then that the worst blow would come from a place I'd never expected. He didn't know the worst was coming either. He walked into our home the next day like it was still his kingdom. He had no idea the coronation he'd been planning was about to be canceled. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of courtrooms, lawyers, and carefully orchestrated revelations. Mark tried to act calm, confident, untouchable, but every step he took was already on my chessboard. The first day in court, he strutted in wearing his usual suit, the one he wore when he wanted everyone to believe he was untouchable. But when the judge asked for the documentation of transfers and emails, the color drained from his face. I sat quietly, Sophie and Ethan beside me, and watched as his composure cracked line by line. Rachel presented everything: the bank statements, the hotel reservations, the photos, and the messages between Mark and Vanessa. She even included the forensic accountant's report, showing just how much of our savings had been drained and redirected. The courtroom was silent. Everyone could see the depth of his betrayal. Mark tried to argue, tried to twist words and play the victim. It was all for the family. I didn't mean... But the judge cut him off. The evidence was undeniable. Even his lawyer looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers as if the weight of truth had settled in the room. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Part of me wanted to cry out, to finally release the years of pain and betrayal. But I stayed calm. I had to. My kids were watching. And more than anything, I wanted them to see that strength wasn't about fists or shouting. It was about holding your ground when the world tried to break you. By the end of the week, temporary custody was granted fully to me. Mark was allowed only supervised visits with the kids. The judge also froze the remaining joint accounts and approved an order allowing me access to the house and car. Everything I had quietly prepared was now officially in motion. Outside the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of Vanessa. She was whispering, trying to reassure him with a touch or a smile. But he looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months, with panic in his eyes. The money she had loved, the plans she thought she would share with him, was slipping through their fingers. By the time the trial concluded a month later, Mark had lost everything. The house, the accounts, even the car he had bragged about. Vanessa had quietly backed out once she realized there would be no more funds, leaving him with nothing but humiliation. I took my kids home, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. The house, once full of tension and betrayal, now felt like a place we could breathe in again. I unpacked Sophie's school projects, Ethan's baseball gear, and placed them carefully in their rooms. For the first time in months, I felt safe. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone. I held a cup of coffee, still warm, and stared out the window. I thought about everything: the affair, the stolen money, the lies, the planning, the quiet plotting that had consumed so many sleepless nights. And then I smiled. Not because it had been easy, not because revenge was painless, but because I had taken back control. I had turned the tables on the man who underestimated me. I had protected my children. I had saved our future. And I had proven to myself more than anyone that betrayal might hurt, but it does not have to define you. The storm had passed, but the lesson remained. Those who betray your trust can only hurt you if you let them. I didn't let him. And in the silence of the house that night, I finally felt something I hadn't in years: peace. The days that followed felt strange and quiet. The chaos, the lies, the constant tension, it had all been swept away. Mark was gone from our lives, limited to brief, supervised visits with the kids. Vanessa had disappeared like a shadow, leaving nothing behind but empty promises and bitterness. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe.
I could cook dinner without glancing nervously at the clock, check the bank account without stomach-churning fear, and tuck Sophie and Ethan into bed knowing they were safe. I didn't celebrate. Not really. This wasn't a victory parade. Revenge had been a long, difficult path, and the satisfaction was quiet, almost somber. But it was enough. It was justice. It was proof that no one could steal my life without consequences. Sometimes late at night, I sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and think back to the woman I was before it all began. The trusting, naive wife who believed in a perfect life. That woman is still a part of me, but now she's tempered with something stronger. She's wiser. She's cautious. And she's fearless when it comes to protecting what matters most. I learned something vital through all of it. Betrayal cuts deep, yes, but it also reveals the truth about people and about yourself. I discovered a strength I didn't know I had, patience I didn't think I could summon, and a will to fight for my family that nothing could shake. Sophie and Ethan noticed the change too. They see me as steady, calm, and safe. A mother who won't let anyone take what is hers. They feel it in the small routines of our home, in the laughter that returned to the living room, and in the quiet certainty that we are okay, no matter what the world throws at us. I don't dwell on anger anymore. I don't fantasize about punishment or revenge. I did what needed to be done. The rest, I let go. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about Mark, about the lies, about the money he lost, and a tiny part of me feels vindicated, a thrill that justice was served. But mostly, I feel relief. Because I took back control of my life. I protected my children, and I proved to myself that no one, not even the person you trust most, can define your worth or steal your future. I've learned to trust my instincts, to stand firm, and to never ignore the whispers inside that tell you something is wrong. And for anyone watching this, if there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this. Betrayal may break your heart, but it does not have to break your life. Strength, courage, and patience, these are the weapons that let you rise even when someone tries to tear everything down. I am Emily. I survived. I fought back. And I won. Not through luck, not through magic, but through determination, strategy, and the refusal to be a victim any longer. The house is quiet now. The children asleep, the night calm, and for the first time in years, I finally feel free.